Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this third webinar for Open Air's Carbon Removal Challenge. This week, we have a very special guest indeed, Vida Gabriel PhD, co-founder of TerraFixing and current Chief Operating Officer. TerraFixing is an Ottawa-based company that's developed the only direct air carbon capture technology for use in cold, dry climates. Vida has a PhD in sustainable chemical reaction engineering and has been recognized in the Forbes 30 under 30 list. So I sometimes we have two types of audience. We have a live audience and we have a asynchronous viewership of this recording on our YouTube page. So sometimes I will be reading questions out loud and I'll be saying things that may appear evident to some, but we're keeping in mind the very diverse and broad audience that these webinars get. The general flow will be just in casual conversation with Vida, and towards the end of this, we'll have a little bit of time for Q&As. So if there are any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll get around to that. We'll make some time to answer those. And please sure not to put those in the chat because we won't read those out if they're in the chat. So please do put them in the Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Vida Gabriel. Vida, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. This is really exciting.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Duncan, for the invite and for your kind introduction.
So as you know, the Open Air Carbon Removal Challenge has been going for 3 years. We're going into our third year, and we're very excited because we've busted through all sign-up records, and sign-ups for this year's challenge closed down 2 days ago, and we reached a whopping 53 teams. So that's 159 students organized into 53 teams, spread out over 6 continents, 20 countries, and 51 universities. And some of the universities have been Purdue and University of Michigan, and a whole whack load of students that are interested in carbon removal. So this is exciting for the organizers, and it's great that we have Vida today in conversation because Vida is a perfect example of what the challenge tries to do. And the challenge tries to demonstrate a pathway into carbon removal as a viable, gainful career. It essentially tries to take people from academia and run them through professionalization and expose them to all facets of the carbon removal industry. And if we do our job well, then they become people like Vida Gabriel. How do you feel with that description, Vida?
Well, firstly, what an exceptional, incredible number of signups for the students. That's incredible. 53 teams. That's over double what there was last year. And how many students? That's amazing. So I'll say kudos to all the students who have put themselves out there to apply for this challenge. I suspect this is something that goes above and beyond like the students' normal, academic journey. Like this is in addition to their course load. This is in addition to if they're doing research, they come together for these projects. So that's really incredible. And that needs to be celebrated for sure.
Thank you. Yeah, no, well, we are very, very, very proud of the results so far, and some of the co-organizers of the challenge are on this call. They're not. We can't see them right now, but it's a very strong team that's behind the challenge, and we band together with our organizational skills, and we get the word out. And the word resonated and the signups have come in. So yeah, just to give you an idea of the progress from year to year, last year we got 29 student teams, and this year we got 53 student teams, including all major continents. Well, basically all continents, including Latin America. That was the one continent that was missing from signups last year.
Wow. Oh, wow. That's so exciting. I can't wait to see all the different presentations and what the students have to put together. This is really cool.
Yeah, and so what I would like to do is I'd like to get an idea from you, Vida, about your particular experience going from university into the carbon removal space and timelines, challenges, pitfalls, trampolines, the things that gave you encouragement, the things that gave you a little bit of apprehension. And I think your experience will serve so over the course of the next 30 or 40 minutes, hopefully we'll paint a picture of what's possible for university students. And I think this will be really, really helpful and encouraging for the participants on this call and the participants of this year's challenge.
My pleasure. Let's dive into it. What's the first thing I can shed some light on for you?
Terrific, thank you. So thinking back to your university days, if you can find that moment, if you can isolate that moment, when did your gaze turn to climate action? And it could be that your gaze turned to climate action well before your university days, but in your studies, when did you start to take into consideration that climate action is something that you wanted to invest your professional energies into?
Hmm. Yeah, the climate has been on my minds like from a very young age. I think the school system that I grew up in Brampton, just north of Toronto, and I went to a French school, and somehow I always remembered climate being a part of the curriculum. Um, I mean, even diving further back, like the very first instance of me realizing like climate impact, like what my actions could do on the climate, was as silly as I used to watch Barney as a very young child. And the first like little jingle that I had in my head was that song that they would encourage kids not to let the water run as you brush your teeth. It's like when you're brushing your teeth, you're having so much fun. Never let the water run was kind of the thing. And then, you learn to turn off the lights when you leave a room, and, baths are not as eco-friendly as showers. And so it's always kind of been there. I'd say from a career standpoint, when that value started to get translated into my career was when I started my undergraduate degree. I signed up for chemical engineering. I loved chemistry, and learning about polymerization, for example, was one of the topics in chemical engineering. And it really troubled me that we were designing materials that are meant to be extremely durable and that don't break down. And then here they are accumulating in nature. So I'll say my gaze turned to climate action when realizing how our everyday life and our habits and behaviors and our lifestyle is contributing to pollution and the like negative impacts on ecosystems. So I'd say in my undergrad, that's when it started, and it started more so from a waste management perspective.
Interesting. Okay, so that was the entry point there. And climate space is quite large. So you started with waste management, and where was the juncture where you turned to carbon removal? I know it's difficult to maybe
Yeah.
pinpoint exact moments, but it's just
Oh,
interesting.
I remember it very well. And it was, I have to say, quite an uncomfortable conversation with the person who was now my co-founder. At the time, we were just friends in university. I was obsessed with this idea of wanting to develop biodegradable polymers. I'm like, I don't think that plastics are going to disappear anytime soon. So we may as well make them so that when they go into nature, that they don't just accumulate, that we can break them down. And so here I was, R&D, trying to figure out what different things that we can add into the formulation of a polymer so that at the end of its life, we can trigger it to break down. And so Sean, my co-founder, at the time we were just friends in university, started so he already had this idea of carbon capture. This is before TerraFixing submitted his patent and of this stuff. The idea was in his mind, and I think he was trying to be an evangelist in the climate action space without really know. Like I don't think he intended it, but he was just so passionate. So anyway, one of the questions he asked me, he kept probing. He's like, "Okay, Vida, like, what's your dream? If you had a magic wand and you could wave it, like, what would you do?" And I said, every single use type of plastic we can put in the compost, it would biodegrade and it wouldn't accumulate in nature. And he said, okay, what happens to the material? Like what is a polymer made of? And I said, oh, it's a long carbon chain and it's very durable. And I want to be able to break it down so that microorganism can eat it poop it out, and then that's it. And he said, okay, like, Vida, tell me what happens to the molecules. Like, you have this carbon, yes, it's accumulating in nature, but it doesn't just disappear. We know, like, nothing, matter isn't like created nor destroyed, it's simply converted. And so what happens to this? And then it occurred to me that, you know what, I was diverting the waste problem from landfill to atmosphere. Because yes, it's true, while a microorganism can come and eat up all of this plastic, some of the matter returns and goes back into the soil, but it exhales CO2. And so it occurred to me that a lot of these waste management problems end up turning to incineration, for example. It's a lot cheaper just to burn big mass, recover some type of energy instead of going through the whole process of separating, cleaning, recycling. Like, things just turn to incineration. So it clicked to me at some point that, okay, waste management, the easiest type of solution, which municipalities can afford, is burning it. And then for me, it just made sense. All of this problem, all of our waste problems will end up at some point in the atmosphere. Even when you and I, Duncan, will die, we will degrade. And where will we end up as matter? We will be decomposed, and we're going to also end up in the atmosphere. So for me, if I wanted to have the biggest climate impact, removing carbon from the atmosphere was the end all be all. It was the epitome of good that I could do for the environment. So that's when I switched over from my polymer world into the carbon capture world.
That is so cool. It's so cool the way the sort of like the funnel of climate action. There's academic interest that turns into passion, that then turns into execution, and from there it becomes a thing. It becomes a lifestyle, an occupation. And I love that this sort of like that you lensed way out and you fathomed that there's basic off-gassing, which is part of every like part of the cycle of composition and decomposition. Okay, so getting a little bit back into, I love that. I love that kind of that large scale vision that you just painted for us, but getting back into life in academia. Once you had this vision, how did it affect tangibly your course and activity choices? Like, what are some of the air brackets moves that you made to start to go in that direction? Did you seek out recycling clubs, or did you just, you and Sean, hunker down and be like, how can we make something that's going to solve for this?
So I'll say the very first move that I made, and this was prior to my actual entry into the carbon removal space, was just the interest and the ambition to do research. In my fourth year, we had the option in chemical engineering at University of Ottawa between taking 2 electives or engaging with a prof in a research project. And nobody wanted to do the research project that, or I'd say it's less popular because it's a lot more work than taking an elective. Like, I think the electives were like Greek mythology. I think that there was like a sorcery class or something. It was like these fun classes that in a chemical engineering degree, like, we don't have fun electives. So all my friends would go and do those things, but I decided, okay, I'm very curious about this topic and I'd like to explore that. So the first move that I did was, okay, sacrificing some fun times and fun classes to instead do a little bit of like the harder but more fulfilling work. So engaging in research early was the first thing that I did. And typically the research projects, if you want to do anything good, it's a 2-semester long, but it's known to roll into the summertime also. So to end up being a full year thing, if you want to get some good results. So I sacrificed traveling and having fun, let's say, in a summertime with my friends who were going to Europe and backpacking to stay in and do. So that was move 1. It was deciding that this thing is important and I'm going to sacrifice a little bit of short-term pleasure for something a little bit bigger. So that's 1. From there, so hang on, just so I'm not going off on tangents, can you remind me of your question, Duncan?
Oh no,
Yeah.
you're actually right on a roll there. You're answering perfectly what I was asking. So I was asking, what are some of the moves you made to start to put your vision into application, start to execute on your vision of wanting to reduce the off-gassing and prohibiting some of these things that go back into the atmosphere. And choosing to not do the sorcery class was the first move.
I can't even remember the name of the class, but it was like this witchcraft and something. It just sounded so peculiar. And of course, everyone would sign up for it because it was the only class from the non-engineering side that you were allowed to sign up for, including Greek mythology or something like this. That was ridiculous. And
That's
anyway,
actually really good. So folks, if you're listening and you reach a fork in the road and there's the choices to do a witchcraft class or to do a research class, you will become Forbes 30 under 30 list. Well, no,
you know what? If I did take that witchcraft and sorcery and learn a couple spells, maybe I could solve this climate crisis a little faster than
I
I'm
think you
doing
took
now.
I think you took exactly the right choice, Vida. And yeah, and now, several years later, you're recognized by Forbes as being 30 under 30. And I think that that's worth noting because that is a major accomplishment. And that's just one of Vida Gabriel's accomplishments. If you were to peruse her LinkedIn, I think that the link might be in the chat. She's very frequently cited in the news as being a mover and shaker in the CDR space. So we wouldn't have time to list all of her accomplishments, but the Forbes 30 under 30 is just one of them. So really congratulations on that. That's terrific.
Thank you,
Um,
Duncan.
so now kind of zooming ahead to graduation. You did your research, you had this vision, you did the research, you met someone who might possibly be a good partner, um, professional partner. You've graduated from University of Ottawa, you have the degree, now you're faced with entering the job market. You had a decision to get a job. It could be with DuPont, it could be with Cascade or Bombardier, or Google or SpaceX, or you create your own job. Why did you go the entrepreneurial route?
Okay. The why was because of this deep-rooted sense of responsibility that I felt towards the climate. I mean, I can go back and thank Barney and friends for reminding me to shut the water off when I brush my teeth. For me, when looking at life and about like what people want in the end of it, people want like happiness, you want fulfillment, you want to be able to spend time with your loved ones. And okay, to be able to do all those things, life, we also need money to be able to, I'm not going to say, to be able to enable us to get that sense of fulfillment. You have to work to live. Okay. No matter what, in your work, there will come times or periods of stressful times. And you have to kind of go through those stressors to be able to do the things in your life that you want to do. So no matter the job that I take, I know that there's going to be stress, may as well have a career in a place that also aligns with my values. If I'm going to be stressed anyway, whether I worked at DuPont or I'm doing a startup, I'm still going to face the same or similar types of stressors, perhaps not as much responsibility, but still, like, life is stressful. I've never heard of somebody who says that they're never stressed in their job, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in engineering, like, so, okay, I may as well expend that stress in a thing that I truly believe in and that I value. So your question here was why go into climate? And that was because I felt like it would be almost like knowing all the things that I know about how my lifestyle is affecting the climate. I wouldn't be able to live with myself. It would be unethical for me to not move the needle in the right direction, because I can't help the fact that my clothes are made from polyester and other polymers. I can't help the fact that, yeah, while I may drive an electric car, where are those electrons going to come from? And yeah, when I go to the grocery store and buy my things, it was transported on trucks. I can't avoid the fact that my existence is causing more carbon. So for me, that decision was one that was driven by like a sense of responsibility, a passion, like to use my skills and the knowledge I've acquired to do good.
It's very noble, it's very honorable, and I think it deserves to be recognized and underlined as like the working climate space is cause-based, and of course it can also be very gainful employment, but it starts off primarily with it being a acting on profound conviction and integrity, and that's terrific that you chose that, and the climate space is richer for you having chosen that course. So what about, I guess it's hard at first. It's probably would be easier to zoom in and get that revenue security, but you might go through a little bit of a lull before you take off. Can you speak to that a little
Yeah.
bit?
Oh, totally. I remember even like finishing my undergrad. I I knew from my undergrad that I wanted to go down the route of research, and that was because I had started my fourth year type my project. I was getting some good results. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go from my undergrad into my master's. Meanwhile, all my friends were applying for jobs and getting job offers, and we're comparing. They're comparing amongst themselves, like, oh, like what offer did you get from this type of company, or how about that? And I'm seeing the numbers of what I could be getting, and then there's a little bit of stress there, like, oh, am I giving up on an opportunity? And then there's also this thought, well, something that people say about like people who speak against doing graduate studies will say, okay, when you have a master's, your baseline salary, while it may be higher, you don't have any experience. And so it'll be hard for you to enter the job market because no one's going to want to pay that rate, not knowing that you have that kind of experience. So I'll say, yeah, there was certainly that. And then when I was in my master's and my friends are now accumulating 1 year, 2 years of job experience and kind of climbing up the ranks, then the opportunity of a PhD came down. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, yeah, I know that my net worth right now technically is higher. Should I be doing, am I educating myself into a corner of not being able to be hireable because I'm continuing to do all these, like gaining all this knowledge and skills and having that title of PhD, whereas my friends are accumulating years of experience. It was a hard decision doing each new step. And how I overcame it, I prayed. I talked to my parents and I voiced my concerns. I spoke with my supervisor also to ask him, like, obviously my supervisor at that point went through all academia. He worked in industry, but came back ultimately to academia. So he needed the master's, the PhD and stuff like this. But I'll say it was not an easy decision, especially like now graduating a PhD, that's 5 years of experience that my friends had over me. Yeah, my entry salary rate would potentially be higher, but getting that first job. And so I'll say it was challenging to make that decision. But at the end of the day, I was realizing that throughout doing this extra study, what was I doing? I was investing in myself. I was growing. I was becoming, the more that you can learn, grow, and enrich yourself with new skills, experiences. Like when you're doing a PhD, it's not like you're just reading books and typing things. It's okay, you're in the lab, you're doing some research, piece of equipment breaks. It's not part of the requirements of a PhD student to become a mechanic and fix the equipment, but like, oh my gosh, I can't run my stuff. So here I am, have to learn on the spot. I get on the phone with the manufacturer. I read the, you end up opening panels that you're not supposed to open so you can figure out what component burnt so you can take it to the machine shop and figure it out. So I'll say that what gave me comfort was my parents reminding me that you're gaining a plethora of skills that you otherwise wouldn't be if you were working a fixed job with a fixed job description and fixed responsibilities. Whereas research is one of those things where you can achieve as much as you say you want to. You set your goals and then you create your own path to complete your experimental rig may not even exist. You may have to build one, which is my case in my PhD. So it was certainly a hard decision. Money and lifestyle and seeing your friends post photos of their 2-week holiday in Cuba versus you being stuck in a lab, it's challenging. But at the end of the day, I'll say, as long as you know what your end goal is and you're not doing it just for the sake of a title or just doing it, there's no, I can't see doing extra studies being a bad thing. It only enriches you because you're investing in you and you're growing.
I love that. Okay, that painted such a vivid picture of research not being just sitting in a chair and poring over data. There's a very, very strong practical element to it. Fixing machines, like you say, opening panels that shouldn't be open, getting on the phone with manufacturers. So troubleshooting, and these are all life skills and problem solving. And might I add, to all of this, your transition then from doing your PhD, which was more of a research-based occupation, to business. You went into industry and then you started getting into business administration. And
Oh
how
yeah.
can we talk a little bit about that transition? Because all of a sudden you had payroll and
Oh my God.
marketing and legal and office space and human relations and legal issues. And so what about that transition to the industry can you call out as being noteworthy?
Oh my goodness. I felt so out of place, like a fish out of water. The amount of books that I read of like, what's a cap table? Again, diving into the payroll, figuring out how one does that. At some point, I remember manually making pay stubs. The first person we hired was a student that was helping us build TerraFixing graphical assets. She was basically a marketing student. So we were just trying to get ourselves to look more legitimate. And I remember manually making these pay stubs and going on CRA website and learn. So I'll say I felt like such a fraud at the beginning because here I am with an engineering degree, PhD in engineering, leading a business or co-founding a business really. So figuring out everything corporate. And when I say we dove into books and YouTube videos and all of these things, like I wish ChatGPT existed or was popular then. I think I would have learned a lot faster. But like literally like these like startups for dummies books is the things that we were reading. So I'll say yeah, going from the academic world into building a startup, like a lot of those skills that I learned in my PhD were transferable of, you know, you need to get somewhere. Now you have to figure out how. And learning the skills and diving into the literature and seeing what others have been doing, getting involved with different networks. Like, you know, when you're doing your PhD and you want to use a piece of equipment that you've never used before, you go in the logs and you see, okay, who were the latest people that have used this piece of equipment? Let me go be friends with them so they can come and train me on this and like learn. So all of those things that I had learned by doing my master's and PhD, those skills I was able to take forward and okay, we need to get this done. Let's just figure it out. So I'll say at the beginning, my confidence was low and I felt like a fraud because here I am doing business stuff without having a business degree. That was a big thing that I struggled with. And I'm really thankful to my mentors, people with whom I've hopped on calls either weekly or every 2 weeks to talk me through that and pointing me in the right directions and books to read and giving me some guidance and stuff like this. I'll say all of this legal stuff. I remember like the first contracts that I read, oh my gosh, like just to sign a non-disclosure agreement. What is supposed to be in an NDA? What's a normal clause? What's not? So grabbing a bunch of templates from other founders that were nice enough to share them with me to read through them. Okay, what's different from here versus that? How should I be protecting myself? Oh, okay, this NDA is for like a design type contract or for consulting. How does it work if I have sensitive IP? So I'll say going through it all, it was a lot of just doing your best and learning and bouncing ideas off of other people. But I'll say, yeah, it was for anyone who was in this and feeling like you're not enough or that you're a fraud or having imposter syndrome. I'll say those are all a lot of one thing that I was thankful for when chatting with my parents, for example, about how I was feeling at the start of the startup, is my dad said, Vida, this sounds a lot like when you first started your master's. I remember a single academic paper in my field, which I'm like, you're supposed to be an expert in the thing that you're doing your research on. I remember going through one paper used to take me a couple of days really to go in and understand because you're reading and then there's a term or a concept, you don't know what it is. Then you dive into the reference of that sheet just to understand what that is. Then you hop back into your paper. Then you're looking at figures. You're like, oh, I don't know how that piece of equipment actually does that thing. What does that result mean? Then you go and you dive in. So going through one paper would take so long. And by the end of it, I'm going through papers in minutes. And so my dad was like, or what I realized through conversations with my parents is, okay, these are the growing pains. I felt at the time like I knew nothing and it took me forever to come up to speed. But then all of that grinding and that work then made it so that when I was in my PhD, I was highly productive and was able to produce really great research in much, much shorter time than what I was able to do at the start of my master's. So with that, though I took all of those feelings of I'm not enough. What am I even doing in business? I don't have a business degree. What am I doing with all these finances? Like, taking that and then not beating myself down, but instead saying, okay, these are skills that I'm learning. Like learning is never comfortable. Like this is part of the process. I went on a long tangent there, Duncan.
No, that was absolutely amazing, and that was perfect because you basically answered several questions in one. And I was going to ask you about the value of agility and flexibility, and there's a learning curve to absolutely everything. And then you referred to how your father mentioned that it was the same at the beginning of your master's degree, and we can never say that enough, is that we are resilient creatures, and there's a lot to be said about learning and problem solving and skill acquiring. And it seems like you've done this at repeated stages of your academic and now professional life. And yeah, every time you face a new obstacle, you become that much stronger, and there's another arrow in your quiver. And so what are some of now, okay, TerraFixing was, correct me if I'm wrong, founded in 2020. So you're almost 5 years in. And so do you still consider yourself in the startup phase? How do you now think of Vida Gabriel professionally? Are you excuse me, a more mature company, or you still consider yourself to be a startup founder?
Still a startup. Totally still a startup. Right now, I'm sitting in a lab space that we managed to secure through an accelerator program at the University of Ottawa. I'll say, oh yeah, still totally a startup. Are there any things in particular that you want me to touch on?
Well, when will you give yourself the credit of having graduated from startup phase? Like when will you say to yourself, okay, I'm settled. I can now take that vacation in Cuba. Like I'm trying to, because it's all happened in a relatively short period of time. You graduated from University of Ottawa with your PhD, you set up TerraFixing. Now we're going into the year 2025. Things are going very well. But when will you start no longer think of yourself as a startup founder? Or is that something, an engine inside of you, an existential engine that drives you and keeps you facing the challenges that you need to face?
I guess it all comes down to what we define, like the definition of a startup versus like a real company, and like what the differences would be in terms of responsibility and who holds the responsibility, that kind of thing. I don't think like if we remain in startup mode versus if we're a real company, I mean, startups are companies. I don't really think that it matters all that much. I say that we're a startup because we're still developing our processes. We're still figuring out like what the right business model is and how we're going to generate revenue. We're still pre-revenue. I say we're still a startup because there's so much growth and learning happening every day. Whereas I'd say in a non-startup company, it's less turbulent, less change. It's more direct. You've got your processes that are largely have been validated and working, and you can go forward, like everything from corporate type of workflow to research workflow. So I believe we'll stay in startup mode for a while. It also means that we have the agility to be able to pivot on a day-to-day. We're going through so we work in sprint cycles, and typically our sprint cycles, so we have a main objective, we have our developers, which are the team members, and they're usually three weeks long. This particular month, we had an interruption, or we had to, the first time it happened, interrupt the sprint, tell people, okay, we're putting this aside for like a mini sprint because we need certain things. And I feel like in the corporate world, you may not be able to go and disrupt things that easily and be able to jump from one project to the next to be able to deliver a thing that fast. I suspect we're going to stay in startup mode for a while, at least until our commercial unit has been, so I say the commercial unit, we're building a pilot now. I'd say until perhaps the we reach the commercialization stage of what the final unit will look like, I think is when we will be out of startup mode. But until then, there's just so many moving parts and we're making these decisions. And yeah, I think we'll be in startup mode for a while, but that's
Okay.
not a bad thing.
No, I don't think that is a bad thing. And it's that fire that keeps you forging forth. So as you know, and as the people on this call know, the Carbon Removal Challenge has partnered with Carbon Unbound East Coast, which is the carbon dioxide removal leadership summit that takes place in 3 locations every year: New York, London, and they trialed a West Coast last year. I don't know if they're going to be bringing back the West Coast this year, but in any case, there's definitely a Carbon Unbound East Coast that'll be happening in late May of this year. And finalists that our panel of judges will choose from the 53 entries, the 5 finalist teams will be flown to New York City, all expenses paid, accommodation, they'll be given a per diem, and they'll have the chance to attend and present their unique design for carbon dioxide removal to a room full of investors. And Vida, you saw this presentation last year, and there's a video of it on our website if anybody wants to take a look at that. My question to you, Vida, is how useful are conferences like Carbon Unbound to aspiring carbon removers? They're at a different place in the service cycle. They're beginning their careers in carbon removal, and all of a sudden they're put into a room with 500 of the leading practitioners. What is can we speak a little bit to that experience for someone who wants to forge a career in that area?
I love going to Carbon Unbound. It's one of the top 3 conferences that I look forward to each year. And the reason for that is because you've got all the right people all in the same place at the same time. I'll say one of the great things that I like about conferences, and this one in particular, is for any student or person who's on the fence about, do I want a career in climate? Do I not want a career in climate? Well, this is your way to go and to immerse yourself in a space where there are investors, there are the innovators themselves, there are people who are looking around for jobs, and to see like, okay, do I see myself in this type of an environment? I remember when I was looking for which university that I wanted to go to, I went and I visited the campuses. And I remember one particular campus, especially the dormitories that I went to, I went there and I felt a feel like the students didn't look very happy. It was kind of messy and smelled weird. And I was like, oh, like, do I see myself living here and being in this? It's a great way to put yourself and say, do I admire the people that I see? Do people here inspire me? These could be my potential colleagues. So from that perspective, I love the Carbon Unbound conference because you're not just with a representative, like you were meeting with the founders, with the innovators, with the people who are doing the work. So if you go and you think, you see the environment and people seem really stressed or that they're unmotivated or there's a lot of gossip, like you can feel what the atmosphere is going to be like. And I guarantee you'll feel it for yourself. The carbon removal space is one of the most cooperative and positive and mission-driven spaces that you will ever find. Each time I go to a Carbon Unbound conference, I come back with an even stronger renewed sense of like, yes, I have certainty, like this is the direction I want to go in. You come back having learned more, connected with more people. It's just this energy and like validation that you're going in the right direction. So, I mean, this is from my perspective. I've already devoted my career to this, but for people who are curious about what this could look like, yeah, go there and listen to the panels and see if you agree with the values or the things that are being talked about on stage. Are you moved by these problems? Do the people in the room inspire you? Can you see them as being your potential colleague or boss? I really find the value in like seeing what the industry as a whole is like. And then from there, if you agree and you like that kind of an environment, then that's a good point of validation for you that, if this is where you want to go, then I think you'll be very happy and fulfilled.
I think that's a terrific answer. Vida, we're going to switch over to Q&As because there's a ton of them streaming in. You've hit a chord with our people here, so I'm going to just launch in and read them out, and then we'll take these on one by one. So first question is, starts off saying, "You are incredibly inspiring. I'm in awe of everything you've accomplished. As I prepare to wrap up my PhD next year, I can't help but feel like I don't quite measure up to the vision you've described. I haven't been as productive as I hoped, and that's been weighing on me. How do you encourage people who are further along in their programs who might feel like time is running out to stay hopeful about achieving something meaningful or making a difference? Your perspective would mean a lot."
Hmm. It's so interesting because when people talk about their successes, you're just seeing the end point. I can assure you that by the end of my PhD, I was not feeling this confident, not whatsoever. I felt like an imposter. Okay, yeah, I have knowledge in like sustainable polymer reaction engineering, and now I'm calling myself a founder of a carbon capture company. I compared myself so heavily to my co-founder, who's one of the like global leaders in adsorption. I'm like, who am I to be sitting beside him leading a company in carbon capture when I didn't study this? So I'll say on the one front, there's this saying that goes, you become like the five people you spend the most time with. Really, the saying is you become like the five people that you compare yourself to. So firstly, kudos to you for comparing yourself to high achievers, because that's a way that you're going to get and become like that. So that's one. A second thing I'd say is don't forget to look from like where you started versus where you are now. I know we always look at the next thing and compare ourselves to higher, but don't do that to the extent that it defeats you. The one person you should compare yourself to is who you were yesterday. And I'm saying this, I don't practice it as much as I need to. I certainly still have these doubts and these feelings. So there's that. How do I encourage people who are further along in their program who might feel like time is running out to stay hopeful about achieving something meaningful or making a difference? One of the things that helped me a lot was learning about mindset and how mindset is so important in everything. And what I mean by that is, like, you can go to an ice cream store and get a scoop of ice cream. And if you were expecting to get 10 scoops, yeah, you could be pretty darn disappointed. But if you were going into the ice cream shop thinking that it was closed and you get a scoop of ice cream, man, you'd be really happy. So I'd say if there's one book or a thing that I could recommend is finding some books that can help you like learn and grow and make your mindset like so much. Maybe Duncan, you can help me fill some words here. Like I know you run some marathons, and it's the race is in your head more than anything, or Ironman is what you do, which I think is really cool, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah, yeah. No, I think I understand totally what you're saying, and it's not set the bar low, because it's not about setting low standards at all. It's just about managing expectations, and then also setting up small, easily attainable objectives in the short term, so that you're not defeating yourself with failure, having achieved grandiose things in a short term. I think that may be what you're saying, but I also,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's one particular YouTuber um, motivation leadership coach that I follow and I listen to his stuff. His name is Dan Martell. Grew up in New Brunswick and now he's moved. He does a lot of fun stuff. I'd say maybe listen to a couple of episodes of Dan Martell and just see. I find his energy to be so contagious. You can pull lessons and find accomplishments out of everything. It just depends on how you look at it. I think this is one of the things that I realize is so important, is that I need to keep feeding myself with the right attitudes, the right motivations, taking the time to set those goals. Because if it's better to compare yourself to a goal that you've set versus just an arbitrary goal that could be changing, you haven't written it down. So I'd say investing in yourself and working on your mindset would be, I think, really helpful. You probably don't give yourself credit or enough type of credit for the things that you've accomplished. I was totally there. And it may sound like I've got it all together and I'm so confident on this and on that. Every day I have moments where I think to myself, am I up to snuff? Who am I to be doing these things? And it's just drilling back down and focusing on, okay, I'm not doing it so that I can be put up on a pedestal. I'm doing it because I have a mission. I have a target. I want to remove gigatons worth of
CO2.
gigatons worth of CO2 out of the atmosphere. Geez. And so then it shifts the perspective that I'm no longer thinking about me and how insecure or skills I don't have, but it's more so, okay, how can I do that? So I think changing the lens or the perspective of that. If there's a mission or a topic that you're passionate about, focusing on that, I think will be helpful.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for these thoughtful answers, Vida. Honestly, it's like I find these answers to be wildly inspirational, and I hope the people in the call do as well. We've got a few others, so we're going to jump onto it. And just in response to that, our co-chair put in the chat that her former boss always quoted his grandmother saying, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." So I feel like that's a nice recap there, and also the value of mindset. And the YouTuber is Dan Martell.
Dan Martell. Yeah.
Dan Martell. Okay, so we're going to look that up, and I hope other people look that up as well. Willem Frankfurt said, "What are some good sources of funding for the initial financing of a startup? Did you find that your advanced degrees helped attract investors? He tried crowdfund a patent once before." I tried to crowdfund a patent once before I started grad school, and nobody would bite. So what advice do you have for Willem about good sources of funding for a startup?
Well, I believe I read Willem's intro from the UK. I can only speak to what I have done in Canada, which I don't know how transferable it'll be. I'll still mention, I just want to look in the chat real quick if I know where Willem's from.
Oh, Willem, if you're in the chat, you want to just pop in there with where you're from?
I think he's in the chat. I think he mentioned he was one of the first, I think, to come in.
Oh. He's representing JHU.
Yeah, Frankfurt.
Mm-hmm.
So I wish I could speak to things in your particular region. For us, well, we started off bootstrapping. So at the beginning, I wasn't taking a salary and neither was Sean. We were logging it on the books and it was money that was owed to us, but not actually paid. And in Canada, we have a program called Shred, where you can get your salary and materials expenses covered by, like, you get it's a credit from the government that you can get back based on your expenditures. So those were the first few, like, okay, we paid ourselves a salary, it's logged in the books, the company owes me this, so now we can get some money back from the government. So that's sort of how things started at the very, very early stages. Personal capital that we also put in, so the little savings that we had from, oh geez, I can't even say, yeah, from the time I was a student. I was fortunate enough to get some scholarships, and I'm pretty frugal, and I was actually able to save up some money. So, okay, here's some funding that we can put in. So it started off really bootstrapping and a lot of our personal money that went into the company. The first few actual grants that we got, it took us a while. We were applying for grants starting back in 2019, 2020 when we incorporated. And the first real big grant that we got from government only came in 2022. It was a lot of no's. It was a lot of, you're not up to snuff. Like, you pitch your proposal and then they don't know who you are. So you get kind of turned down and that kind of thing. So I'd say good sources of funding for initial, if you're in our region, or in Canada, IRAP is a great source of funding. Natural Resources Canada also has funding calls that come out often. SDTC is now back online and they have good seed funds. The easiest way that we could get funding was the little things, like the 5 to 10,000 that would come like through an incubator or startup. You can apply for this, and there's some funding for IP. So we went through Innovations Assets Collective, and there was the first big IP funding that we got was for women-led innovators that we could get. I think it was an $8,000 just deposit in the bank. You tell them you want to submit a patent and they can cover your cost up to X amount. And that was the first thing. And that was probably the easiest, like fastest, like I just couldn't believe that the money was actually deposited and we can go in and submit our patent. So those were the initial sources of funding for a startup, but it is rough at the beginning. You don't have a reputation. Your company, no one knows what it is. Does your website even look legit? Like, who knows about you? What made it easier for us to get financing was the more accelerators that we went through, the more we got our name out, the more relationships that we could build with different networks. And now, oh, this person knows of TerraFixing. Oh yeah, I've heard of them before. I saw a post on LinkedIn, or oh yeah, didn't they go through that program? And so now we're starting to build that credibility. It was a slow and discouraging, like it's a hard start. And I won't hide that. Did you find that your advanced degrees help attract investors? I think that was the, like, at the very start, it was the only sense of credibility that I had. Oh, this individual has a PhD. Maybe I want to talk to them. Like that I found was the only time that I was proud to have that kind of a title. I'm not typically so title focused, but I was like, okay, I need to put PhD or doctor in my emails because otherwise they won't take me seriously. I'm just this random person who's trying to solicit for funds. And then the next one about to crowdfund for patent. I've never tried that, but I can imagine how tough that can be. So I'll say, keep your head up, start with the little ones first. Every little grant or money that you get helps to build your reputation, and that, oh, you've been vetted by this third party. It'll be easier for the next person to trust you, is what I'll say. But the beginning is tough.
Okay.
It's tough.
Okay, that's terrific. Okay, so we've got a few more questions. So we're gonna blaze through some of these, and some of these actually you may have already answered. So but we're just gonna read them out nonetheless to give everyone a chance. So Andrea del Pilar Bojorquez Araque asks, how long did it take for your startup to generate positive profits for reinvestment, or in general generate profits? How did you sustain yourself during that time? I think you mentioned how you sustain yourself during that time, but maybe speak to how long it took for your startup to generate positive profits for reinvestment.
I don't even know what the actual definition of, like, okay, profit versus revenue versus income. All of these numbers are like concepts, don't actually mean the same thing. I'm assuming you mean a lot of the work that we're doing is government funded, and you typically get reimbursed based on your expenditures a certain percentage. So it took us until 2 years into the company being founded. So I think starting in 2022, when we were able to have enough cash in the bank to be able to spend money for research and then claim it back, and then it come back and feed our accounts for us to continue doing this. So that roughly was how long it took. And of course, when we closed our funding round back in May, that was a lump sum of cash that we could use again for the same thing. We're mostly funded by government, so you're able to now make bigger expenditures to be able to claim some back and all of this. So that I'd say around 2 years. And how did we sustain ourselves like up until then? We lived out of our savings for a long time. Shred was really helpful in that perspective, because at the end of the year, you could show what your expenses were and then you can get some money back. So yeah, in the in-between, all of the stereotypes that you see of people living out of their parents' basements, or, I mean, our initial lab space was out of Sean's parents' basement in his childhood home. I lived and still continue to live very frugally. I do all the meal prep. I walk and bike as much as I can. I don't own any real, like, I don't own a home. The most expensive thing that I own is probably my laptop. Gee, like, so it's a lot of just being very mindful of where can my dollar make the most impact, and I'm going to put it there. You'll very rarely see me go to Tim's and buy a coffee. I know it's just $1.50 or what have you. I buy the instant coffee and brew my own. It's really one of those things where, yeah. So how do we sustain ourselves? Continue to live like a student is basically what we've done and what we do.
Okay, that's good to know, and that's very helpful. And obviously, that's not always going to be the case given how things are going. But like for now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because you're doing things for a higher cause. So Gabriel Boyd asks, what sort of mistakes do new engineers and founders tend to make in the carbon capture field, and how can we be prepared to proactively address and hopefully avoid these potential pitfalls?
Oh, that's a great question. Where is it? I like to have the question in front. Oh, gee, hang on.
Oh, no worries. The question is,
Can you repeat?
Yeah, the question is about 3 down from the top. It's Gabriel Boyd, and I read the second part of the question. I can repeat it if you want.
What are some mistakes do new engineers and founders tend to make in the carbon capture field? How can we be prepared? One of the big things that we see is we often like to over-engineer things. You want to solve problems that perhaps haven't occurred yet. And this is good. Thinking forward and seeing, okay, what are the things that I can encounter and how can I design for that? So there's a healthy amount, but being sure not to over-engineer things because like you want to solve your most immediate problems now with the resources you have now. Of course, you want to set yourself up right, but not to over-engineer things. And that's just from an efficiency perspective, time and energy. So I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but it's a tendency that we see. And the second thing is never trust your results, never trust your data, always question. Like, of course, you want to build things to be confident, but I'm saying this from the perspective of you always want to go back and check, always. When you have a model, you're modeling a system and you run and it looks good, you want to assume there's an error. You want to dig in there and find it. Because if you don't, then you're going off of perhaps wrong assumptions or a mistake, and that could have a compounding effect later. So a second thing is, yes, when you have a good result, you want to celebrate, but be critical about it in a healthy amount. That's say I'd be a second thing that I'd like to mention. And the third thing is always, always keep in mind the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, the first, second, and the third law, and how your results, if anything, goes against the second law of thermodynamics, go back to the drawing board, my friend. I think if there's one test that we always do is we always go back to the fundamentals. You can't make energy out of nothing. If your system is too efficient, there's something wrong. So those would be the three mistakes. One, over-engineering. Two, trusting your results too much. Always be critical and always keep the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, especially the second one, in mind as you do your design.
I think that's an awesome way to cap this webinar. There are other questions, but I want to be mindful and respectful of everyone's schedule. We're coming up on the hour. And I just want to extend to you on behalf of the Carbon Removal Challenge organizational team, a really heartfelt thank you for sharing your time and skills and insight and intelligence with us, Vida, because it's been really terrific. You've been very generous and it's been very inspiring as well. So thank you very, very much for that.
My pleasure, Duncan. It's always fun hanging out. So let me know if you want to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give a quick wrap up on the challenge itself, as mentioned at the top of the hour, we've shut down signups for this year. We've frankly got very many signups, which is very encouraging. But now we passed the stage of judging, and our judges will review all of the entries, and from these we'll select the 5 finalist teams. Oh, sorry, no, I'm skipping ahead. I actually have the next stage is to craft the entries, and the deadline for submitting the entries. This is the 53 teams have just reserved their spot in the challenge, and now it's upon them to submit their entries by mid-March. We haven't gotten the exact time yet, but we'll get that to you, and we'll advertise that, and we'll send it out to all of the teams that have signed up. After that, the judges will judge the entries and will select 5 finalist teams to come to Carbon Unbound East Coast on the 20th and 21st of May. And yeah, so thank you once again, Vida. This has been terrific. The thank yous are pouring in on in the chat there. I don't know if you're reading them, but everyone has been very,
and thanks
very
to the students for taking of your time and asking me these thoughtful questions. And I hope it was helpful. For those questions I couldn't get to, find me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you were live in the event, and I'm happy to give you some answers there.
Awesome. Thank you once again, and wishing you a great continuation and a great weekend.
Thanks, you too, Duncan.